This is the Pro Wrestling Illustrated Podcast. I'm your host, PWI senior writer Al Castle, back once again with my co-host Brian Solomon. How's it going?
It's going really well. I'm happy to be here. I have my cup of coffee, so I should be A-okay.
Yes, happy summer, and joining us first time in a while, Righteous Reg, PWI contributor, all-around media man, as you see. How's it going, Reg?
Thanks for having me out. Thanks for having me, Brian. Very excited to be here. It's a great season for us PWI writers. That time is coming. That illustrious 500 time is approaching. So I'm feeling pretty good.
First email went out yesterday discussing some meeting times. I don't know if it's going to work for me. It might be the first time in a long time that I don't make the meeting, but I'll figure it out. And I'm already at work on my draft of a top 10, at least my proposal. Yeah. Thoughts, Reg, you think how hard do you think it's going to be this year? Not giving anything away, but do you think we get to 10? What's the over under on how long it takes to do the top 10?
I think that I feel like the number one's already universal. I feel like I know what the two of you guys are already thinking. Kind of what
I don't even know what I'm thinking yet.
I think this year is it's a lot more up in the air than I feel the last couple of years for the top 10 as a whole. I think the number one is probably not as hard as previous years, but the rest of the list is where I'm like, I don't know, you guys, it's pretty mixed.
Yeah, you know what? One thing, and I was just before I jumped on with you guys, started to put down some names, and again, and this certainly isn't anything official; it's just my thoughts, and we're going to figure it out. But I think one potential challenge is, and not a challenge. I mean, it's going to reflect wherever wrestling is at, but I don't see as much an impact by international promotions as in the past. You know, I'm thinking like who's like the dominant, like, you know, Japanese.
There's not a Josh Alexander type. There's not a big,
also from the Impact, right? From Impact, you know, Ring of Honor is not really a thing anymore. New Japan, they're big guys. John Moxley now, an AEW star. And you know who was a AAA's a big guy for a while, Dolph Ziggler. You know, so like, is that what this top 10 is going to look like? Is it a bunch of WWE guys and AEW guys? And so, well, I mean, it's going to be what it is. It's going to reflect where wrestling is at. But
exactly.
Yeah, Brian, have you spent any time thinking about, you know, even a few names that you think are a given?
Well, in the last like 120 seconds, yes, I have. And you know, I'm trying to figure out who Reg thinks we would say, and I'm thinking like, okay, I guess he's thinking of Cody, right?
I mean,
look, here's the thing: if there was ever going to be a year so far where he'd be number one, this might be the one, because I know in the past he's actually been vocal about not being number one.
Yeah,
you know,
multiple times,
and as well as his sister Teal, who said something to me once about it. But I think, you know, it's one of those things. It's like the way we do it. If you're looking at it as a snapshot right now at this very moment, I would say absolutely yes, that would be my pick. But you know, we have that evaluation period. He won the title in, what was it, like 2 months ago?
Yeah.
not to have the meeting right here.
Right, that's what we're doing. We're having the meeting right now. But
maybe kind of a preview. But even before winning the title, I mean, he was having quite the run.
Like it was his company for a while. Like, he was the top guy, I felt, even with Roman there.
Yeah, I was even going to say that, even, you know, saying, okay, he won it 2 months ago, but you could make a case that he still, even before that, the whole year's worth of the evaluation period has been arguably at or near the top. I mean, yeah, you could make a really good case, but I have to, you know, give it more thought and consideration.
Yeah, and it's going to be by
you have time. You can make a case. Yes.
Yeah, what we say only matters so much. But I don't think Cody's lost a match in the evaluation period, right? I'm not sure. I mean, he lost that match to Brock. Maybe he did lose one match.
He got pinned in the tag team match with The Rock, but
and there was
a
tournament match for something that he lost.
And what's also in his favor, and I know PWI loves this because this is the way, you know, with the house shows and every. I mean, that guy.
Prolific, yeah.
He has like 250 matches a year. I mean, I don't know how he does it. He's like at every single show they do, he's on, especially like house shows. He's on every single one.
Dude's working like he's in the 80s.
Yeah, right. It's like he wants to be like his dad, I guess. I mean, that's part of it, right? And just work, constantly. Well, I mean, if WWE had more shows, he'd be on those too. I mean, they do something like 8 house shows a month. They used to do, like 20, and he'd probably be doing all of them too if they were doing that.
He's going to be tough to beat. I think one of the interesting things, and again, I just started putting some names down, and kind of the narrative in wrestling these days, and one of the reasons we wanted to have Reg out on is to talk about it, is that WWE is so far ahead from AEW. But I think if you're fleshing out that top 10 outside of, and again, nothing's been decided, I think AEW might be better represented in the top 10 than WWE because there's Cody. And then who's that next guy? I mean,
right.
Quite a drop, right? I mean, you could say Seth was last year's number 1, but Seth lost the title, has been out of the picture for a little while. And then you get into kind of like the Drews and Gunthers and Sami Zayns of the world.
Damian Priest.
That's a big distance. Fair to say, I don't even think it's any kind of like spoiler or anything. I don't think Roman makes the list this year, right? I mean, I don't think he's got enough matches.
I was like going to say, did he have enough matches at this point?
Roman's been less active than any time in his career, I think, aside maybe when he took that time off for COVID and the leukemia years back. But I don't know that he wrestled 5 matches.
Yeah, he would go 2 or 3 months between matches, so it's possible that he didn't have enough.
Wow.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
Anyway, that's a teaser of a future issue. There's breaking news to cover on the topic of Roman Reigns. We had the loss of his father, WWE Hall of Famer Sika. That news came out earlier this week, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And we've got some big shows coming up. AEW's in my backyard, Forbidden Door this weekend. We'll talk a little bit about that. And this might post after the show airs, but nevertheless, maybe a kind of having a Reg here, we could debate sort of the state of AEW. Lots of news coming out of WWE. I really feel like they've been pouring on the news with debuts, all kinds of stuff. We've got twists and turns in the Drew CM Punk storyline, which might be the hottest feud in all of wrestling. We have the debut of the Wyatt Six and a lot of mixed feelings on that, and a lot more. We'll talk about it in just a moment. Right now, let me tell you about the latest issue of Pro Wrestling Illustrated. Got mine in the mail earlier this week. Roxanne Perez, NXT Women's Champion. I got to interview her for this issue. A lot of fun, and that's featured on the cover. Lots more here. We've got features on Double or Nothing, the real winners and losers, another kind of throwback to a feature we used to do for WrestleMania. Features on NWA star AJ Francis, the former Top Dollar. On Thekla and so much more. All our usual columns. Brian, what do you write about in this issue?
For some reason, my 2 columns wound up being somewhat connected in theme, because we were talking about how WWE has this working arrangement now with Pro Wrestling Noah in Japan. And so I kind of wrote this cautionary column about like, hey, here's what's happened in the past when they've worked cooperatively, quote unquote, with other wrestling companies. Here's the ones that went out of business. Here's the ones they took over. Here's the ones they stole talent from, blah, 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 blah. And so that was what I'm going to make a lot of friends over there with that one. But I went all the way back to like the beginning of the company and all the different promotional arrangements they had. And I talked about that story about the guy who finds this frozen snake and he nurses it back to health. And then the snake bites him and he dies, remember? And the guy's like, why'd you do that? And the snake's like, because I'm a snake. That was, I may have mentioned that fable in there. So I did that. And my other column, the lockup column is about the Jordan Grace thing, which is interpromotional too. Jordan Grace coming to NXT and what that meant, and how the idea that, I mean, it was the first time that an NXT wrestler ever wrestled a WWE wrestler in a WWE ring. Like it had happened before on indies and things, and just the history of that. So, like I said, kind of similar themes this month for me.
Yeah, a fun issue. You don't want to miss it. And before long, we're getting to work on our 500. So it is a good time to subscribe. Make sure you don't miss an issue. Plug in PWI Podcast in the back. Go to PWI-online.com and get it. Subscribe. You can subscribe to the print edition, the digital edition. We've got bundles where you get both. We've got back issues. We've got everything. PWI is very much still around and doing good work. So again, PWI-online.com. Go there. Back in the day, Brian, a picture you would have seen a lot in the old PWI magazines would have been of Afa and Sika, the Wild Samoans, one of the more colorful acts in the old. Was it WWF or was it WWF at the time? I guess there's some overlap.
It was, well, they came in 79 the first time, so it was already WWF. Yes. They had two big runs in the WWF, 79 to 80. Then they came back in 82, and they were there like all the way almost until the first WrestleMania. And then they were gone.
And then the first, I mean, I was kind of aware of the Samoans when I was very young, but the first I was really kind of exposed to Sika was in his singles run that was a little later in the 80s and working with Hogan on Saturday Night's Main Event. We got the word of his passing earlier this week. You know, modern fans probably know him best as Roman Reigns' dad, you know, and part of that, the real, you know, a bloodline, the Anoi'a wrestling family, really a dynasty. Tell me a little bit about Sika's place in wrestling, both as half of the Samoans and one of the patriarchs of this really legendary wrestling family, and also his own career.
Yeah, well, the first thing I wanted to say is something that I said online, and it's, you know, thinking as a parent, like the first thing that came to my mind is just because we all know that Roman Reigns' push and his whole trajectory had so many stalls and stops and starts and frustrations and things. And there were even stories about Sika getting frustrated when, you know, they pulled the rug out from under him at WrestleMania and all that. And I just think it's really cool that he got to see his son succeed the way he did while he was still here. I mean, that is like the greatest thing that could happen to a parent. I mean, you can't even imagine, you know, you want him to do well in the business, but to sit there and go like, okay, he's literally the top star in the entire business. I mean, that's not something you could ever even dare to even hope for.
It's what Cody didn't get to have with
right. No, right. That's true. That's exactly right. And I posted this picture not when he passed, but a while back. I had this picture of Dusty Rhodes squaring off with Sika in the ring. It was from, I think it was from an old Inside Wrestling or something. And it was like leading up, you know, I posted it leading up to WrestleMania. But I mean, for Sika himself, you mentioned that run in the late 80s. I remember that well, too, because that's when I was starting to really get into the WWF. They teamed him up with Kamala for a little while. You know, that run, I mean, is not, even though that's what we remember because we were kids watching it, that was really sort of like the tail end of his career, because the last thing he did was the WrestleMania 4 Battle Royal, and then he was gone, and then pretty much he was done. I mean, the Samoans would get together a couple of times after that in the 90s because Afa had his own promotion, but that was it. I mean, really the 70s and the early 80s was their time, and the from like 73 to 85, they were one of those teams that basically won every tag team title everywhere they went. I mean, they were almost like the equivalent of the Dudleys in that time period. Like you name it, they won the titles there. Georgia, Mid-South, up in Stampede, they won it. They won a tag team title in Japan. They had you know, for the Wrestling for the Sheik in Detroit, they won the NWA World Tag Team title there. I mean, there isn't a territory that they spent time in that they didn't win the tag team title in that territory. And of course, in the WWF, that's what they're most remembered for today. They won it 3 times. Captain Lou Albano was the manager. I think at the time, this goes to show you, at the time, 3 times was the record for the title. They tied it. And yeah, I mean, they were one of the most memorable teams of that time period. There was the Shea Stadium match where they defended the title against Bob Backlund, who was the world champion, and Pedro Morales together. And that was one of the biggest matches on the show. And that's a show that had, you know, Andre the Giant versus Hulk Hogan and Bruno Sammartino versus Larry Zbyszko on it. So, I mean, they were, yes, it was a tag team, but they were at or near the top of the business for a long time, for like a dozen years together. They really spent most of their time in the business together. And I want to say, too, with the Roman Reigns thing, is that, and I don't mean this in a disparaging way. I mean, I think like if as a dad, this would probably be something that he would have agreed with, but you know, it's cool in a way that it's one of those situations where the son actually eclipsed the parents, which doesn't always happen in wrestling. A lot of times the children of wrestlers, they never quite escape the shadow. And then there's people that you look at them and you go, well, like The Rock, or, you can make a case for Randy Orton, or I don't know if Cody's there yet, but I mean, you can make a case that in some cases the kids outshine the parents, which is a great thing to see, because the Wild Samoans had a great dynasty, and it's like Roman Reigns is almost like the latest part of that dynasty. So it's cool to see.
Yeah. And you see WWE crawling with Samoans now, right? I mean,
right.
Is so dominant in wrestling. And
how many of these people are there? You're probably like,
and for a lot of people, that was the first time they saw kind of that act, right? Like,
right,
knew what Samoans were. A lot of
right,
people.
And I think here's part of it too. I mean, and this is in all seriousness, those guys really rolled with the hand that they were dealt, because the way they got into the business was they were in San Francisco in the early 70s. Alpha and Sika, and they were basically these two crazy wrestling fans. They were like two, everybody knows these guys. Like, they show up at all the shows. They're these two gigantic Samoans. They get really into it. So everybody was like, oh, those guys. And their favorite wrestler was High Chief Peter Maivia. And basically he wound up taking them under his wing, and he looked at them and he's like, you guys should be wrestling, So they got into the business. And the thing about it was, in those days, I mean, for guys like that, there were only certain roles you could play like that. The business has come very far. And again, I'm not taking it away from them. Like, they ran with it, but they had to play these savages who couldn't talk, who ate raw fish, and who were like animals. And Captain Lou had to beat them to keep them in line and that kind of thing. And I think it's a positive thing that now we fast forward all these years later, and there's so many different kinds of opportunities. I mean, I say that just as Jacob Fatu appeared on Raw basically as Wild Samoan number 3.
Yeah.
But what I mean is, that's all it was missing was a raw fish hanging from his mouth. But there's a spectrum. Like, you don't have to be that. You know what I mean? Like, in the old days, if Roman Reigns had popped up on the scene, they would have just been like, oh, Sika Jr., boom. Yeah. And that would have been because that's what they did with Samu, who's, I think, his uncle. He's part of that family, but he's the next generation. When Samu came in, they just made him, you're Samoan number 3. So, like, there was a niche where you had to be. And
kind of the head shrinkers, too.
Yeah, the head shrinkers.
Alpha, who was with the shrinkers, right?
Alpha managed them, and that was Fatu, the Usos' dad, and all that. So, I mean, on the one hand, it's really impressive that they took that and they made it work for them. That's the thing. They actually really made it work for them. They made, it makes me think of the Sheik, writing his book about how he basically turned those stereotypes on their ear and said, okay, you want to look at me this way because I'm an Arab, you're going to, book me this way, then I'm going to turn it into the biggest money-making character I could do. So that's really impressive. But like I said, it's also goes to show, what a better place in a lot of ways it is in the business today, that the later generations of that very family, they don't necessarily have to do that thing. They can if they want to, but they don't have to. There's other options. Like Alpha and Sika could never have been the top guy in the business in their time, especially doing that character. You never would have been able to do it. So, I mean, the business has come really far, and it's a good thing.
Yeah, and Roman's success actually, I think, elevated Sika's legacy.
Totally.
Because if you remember, I think this was during like the Thunderdome days, where I think it was one of the early Roman Jey Uso matches, where at the end of the match, at the top of the ramp, Sika takes the whatever it is, the wreath or whatever, and puts it on Roman. It was kind of like coronating him, and it really, kind of like told that story of this family being a legit wrestling dynasty, beyond, the wild Samoans eating raw fish. So
that was Hell in a Cell 2020. Yeah, that was one of those early matches. Yeah. And the difference, right, for younger fans who may see the Samoan dynasty today and think, because it's 3 generations now, or even 4, think, oh yeah, they've been dominating the industry through all those generations. And that wasn't really the case. I mean, they were always there. They were always present. They always had a part to play, but they never would have been allowed to get as far as they have gotten today. So you know what I mean? Like back then they were an attraction or some type of an oddity kind of thing. And now they're the stars of the show in a lot of ways. I mean, more than ever, more like you were saying, Al, there seems to be every week you turn on the TV, there's more. So, that's something that's changed very much. But at the time, they went everywhere. I mean, like I was saying, they were in Texas, they were out in California, they wrestled in Hawaii. I think they were in Australia. They were just an act that was in demand everywhere they went.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, certainly we send our condolences to the family of Sika, including Roman and everybody in that gigantic family. He had a really special place in wrestling. Reg, having you here, we definitely wanted to talk some AEW. We've been accused, Brian and I, maybe being too hard on AEW in recent weeks. So bring some balance. I'm going to Forbidden Door on Sunday. Excited about the show. I don't think it is. It's a different kind of show, right? Because some of it is just sort of the novelty of seeing stars from one company against those of another. And you could even question, I think, whether that even works anymore. I mean, the Forbidden Door thing, as Brian talked about, and now you're seeing TNA people show up regularly on NXT television. Some of the biggest stars of New Japan work for AEW have
exactly.
I mean, like what those big matches were for a while were the Will Ospreys of the world and the Okadas of the world, and those guys are over there. So I think the novelty is worn off a little bit. That's not to say that there's not the potential for some terrific matches. Some of them just AEW matches. I mean, we're getting Swerve and Will Ospreay on Sunday, which is a gigantic main event. What are you looking forward to on the show?
I think, kind of what you brought up there with like Ospreay and Okada joining the company, it kind of changes what that show represented. Cause like, I don't think kind of what we were talking about earlier with the 500, there's nobody in New Japan that's like, I want to see this person in AEW so bad. I want to see this guy interact with this person. I want to see this happen over here. There's not really that because Okada represented that. Ospreay represented that. Now we see them on a weekly basis. So now it's just like AEW, what they should continue to be known for. It's just like you're going to have the show on Sunday. You have a great card. You're going to put on an amazing show. And that's what you should focus on. Is like there's all these extracurriculars. People tell them, oh, you need to change the story, there's ratings, there's blah blah blah. You're known for putting on the best shows. We're the best wrestle. That's your saying. So just do that. And I think you need to try to expand on what that is. Starting with a show like Forbidden Door, I think is a great way to try to gain some momentum because you're going to have your biggest stars. You're going to have the everybody knows if it's a New Japan type show, you can have longer matches. It's kind of, going into it what the show's going to be. And I think this is a good time for them because with everything that's kind of happened recently, and I was just talking with Phil, my co-host, about if the showing that video, the CM Punk backstage thing with Jack Perry was worth it, and if that's going to lead to anything. And I think they need to kind of start to change the narrative. And I think Forbidden Door is where they do it.
Yeah. They just came off and I don't know what they did this week, but wasn't last week's Dynamite the lowest viewership like ever? I know it dipped to some alarming numbers. So I don't know what to make of that, what that says, whether it's just, cyclical or what have you. But, the criticisms are out there. Something you just mentioned is something that even Matt Hardy, I think, articulated recently. And it's this fair or unfair, this perception that they prioritize work rate, essentially, above everything else. And that only takes you so far. And certainly a show like Forbidden Door, which feels like that's largely the selling point, is like, imagine if this guy got in the ring with this guy. And it's not to say that they haven't told some stories leading up to this, because they have, and they've actually done a good job with the AEW Women's World Title, creating angles with some of these wrestlers. We saw Moxley and Naito mixing it up on Wednesday night. So they have told stories, but the reality of a show like Forbidden Door is that they are kind of one and done, right? And then they move
Yeah.
AEW, watching Dynamite last night as we're recording this, they seem to already be looking ahead to the next thing. I mean, they're already plugging, a Max and Danny Garcia at All In, and it's like, well, don't you have a show like this Sunday that you should be promoting? To me, what they're doing with MJF at Forbidden Door is, like, I don't want to give him too hard a time, but like, really, I mean, one of the biggest stars in your company, you just got him back, first match on pay-per-view, and you put him against Hechicero. I mean, like, I don't know. I would have thought Roosh was a better match when they started promoting that. I think we talked about Brian. It looked like maybe that's the direction they were going, Roosh and MJF, which still wouldn't have been like the biggest thing in the world, but Roosh at least has a little more recognition. So I don't know, but is a thought that they're going to have a really good match, maybe, again, work rate and Brian, we've talked about it. How winning a formula is it to focus so much on the quality of the match, and we could be critical, but I think it's Reg touched on. AEW is about 5 years old. When they came on the scene, that was kind of their calling card, and it worked. I mean, there was a time there where AEW was super hot, among fans, and that excitement of like, oh my God, seeing this guy versus that guy was enough to get a lot of people interested.
Well, I also think that AEW benefited from the fact that that WWE was not hot at the time.
Yes.
So it was like, we were all just like, oh, this is great. Like, because WWE sucks right now, and there's an alternative, and there's a different way. That's the other thing, too. There's a different way of booking, a different way of thinking about wrestling. We've seen the same company with the same philosophy now since 2001, right? They've been the only, there have been other companies, but they've been the only like big show in town. And so there was that, and that really was in their favor. And it's not even a question of, you can debate which company is better from a product standpoint, but just the fact that WWE is so hot right now and so popular, it almost takes some of that novelty away because people maybe aren't seeking the alternative as much anymore. Then the thing about, so they have their fan base, they have the people that love what they see, that really got hooked in and was like, yes, this is what I want to see from a wrestling company. And those people are there. But like we've talked about before, it's like the other people that were maybe like on the fence or just looking at it as the new kid on the block, maybe some of those people have gone away. But I want to say something about the MJF thing because it baffles me a little bit too. But I think to play devil's advocate on it, like if I'm thinking about why they're doing it, I think it looks like what they want to do is give him some momentum, give him some wins over people that he can beat to sort of build him back up. But my issue with it is I don't think they need to do that with him. I mean, he can come right in. He's the kind of a guy who can come right back and you can plug him into something really big right off the bat. And I don't think you need to have that kind of a slow burn with him. Like the one thing that's given me hope is that last night with him, they seemed to tease that, okay, where we're going with this is Ospreay. That's something that's worthy of that. You know what I mean? Like if that turns out to be the reason for it. But other than that, yeah, I'm sitting there going like, okay, Rouge, Hechicero, Daniel Garcia, like nothing against those guys. They're great. But it almost feels like the thought popped into my head, other than the Ospreay thing that made the thought go away. But the thought popped into my head of like, are they punishing him because he was thinking of going to WWE and almost went there? Like, are they saying like, okay, we're going to like keep you in this mid-card place for a little while now until you learn your place or something? But I don't think that's the case. But I mean, it made me think it for like a split second, Yeah,
I don't think I do think, and maybe the flip side of that is, are they looking at it as now MJF is an established draw? He's a star, and we could use him to help get over to these other guys.
With Garcia, I think definitely. Yeah.
I think that's what they're thinking.
Yeah, which I think is fine, but also I don't think they've hit the ceiling yet on MJF, right? This isn't, the old timer who's winding down, who needs to start putting other guys over. I don't think he's 30, So not to say that the show should be all about him, but yeah, I agree. I think he should very much be in the mix. Reg, it's hard for me to figure out sort of where they're going, right? Because I thought Will Ospreay challenges for the title in Wembley Stadium. Makes all the sense in the world. Now they've got him challenging for the title at Forbidden Door. And I was like, oh, that's odd. So maybe he loses here and then they rematch it in Wembley Stadium. But they're already kind of moving on. Didn't they say that the winner of the Owen now gets so he's not even in it. So I don't know. I mean, like, now I'm thinking, does Ospreay win at Forbidden Door and Pac wins, and they do Pac and Ospreay in Wembley Stadium, which again, great match, work rate wise, it could be 17 stars, all that, but I don't know. I mean, like, is that really? I feel like that moment should be Ospreay winning the title in Wembley Stadium, not necessarily defending it. So bizarre, and MJF and Danny Garcia and Wembley Stadium.
I think it's too soon for Ospreay is where I'm leading for him being world champion. So I don't think he's going to win it here at this Sunday or at Wembley. I think the story going, the story going into Wembley's Bryan Danielson. It's like, but they're going to tell the story with him through the Owen, having these incredible matches. And then I'm thinking the scene at the end of All In is Bryan Danielson as the AEW World Champion doing the yes, and the whole stadium's doing the yes. I feel like that's where they're leading to, because they keep leaning into this is Bryan Danielson's last year. He's going to retire. He's having these big matches and moments. And like, he didn't get the biggest moment last year at All In. And I think this year is when they're going to do it.
I don't hate that. Yeah, and you could put, Ospreay in a featured match underneath. And you're right, Ospreay's young enough that you could kick it another year and look ahead to Wembley next year. Yeah, I think that absolutely works. What about the Owens as we have it up? Did you see this Jeff Jarrett promo, Brian? I know if anybody would have appreciated it,
I did.
You would have. I mean, to me, you see that, I'm like, all right, whatever you're doing with the Owen, you don't have to pivot, and Jeff Jarrett has to win the Owen. I mean, it was like, and you're like, oh my God, it's right. It's been 25 years. This is one of like his closest friends in the business, his former tag team partner. He's still, pretty good. Like I don't know. I mean, and it happening in Calgary. He told the story for like, if I'm the booker, he convinced me,
Yeah, I saw that and I was like, boy, he's got to win now. I mean, how could you not? How could you give people that and then have them lose? I mean, unless again, it's part of a storyline where he can't. I mean, what I mean is, like, I guess he doesn't have to win, but if he loses, it can't just be in a way like, oh, Jeff Jarrett lost and he's eliminated from the tournament. Like, it would have to be in a way that, excuse me, like, maybe he gets to the finals and he loses in some awful way that drives people nuts. Like some awful heel does something terrible. Like, it's got to be built into it somehow now. You can't just treat him like any other guy in the tournament after you did that. I mean, otherwise, why did you do it then,
So you're saying they're painted themselves into a corner.
Yeah, kind of. And again, like what I said, not that he has to win. I don't think he has to win, but he's got to play some type of a major part. And if he's going to lose, it has to be in some kind of big, spectacular way that leads to something.
The story that you're telling is that they need to have something for Jeff after this. Because if they do that, that means that he needs to have something after coming out of this if he's going to have kind of a spectacular showing. You're not in the minority with thinking this way too, Brian, because initially when they announced Jeff Jarrett, everybody was like, Jeff Jarrett, what do you mean? And the Owen, they got blah, blah, blah. And then everybody saw this promo and they're like, well, how could he lose now? And I'm like, I think they did paint themselves into a corner.
Right, because if he comes out of it, it's got to be, if he wins, that'd be one thing. If he doesn't win, it has to be like, I am going to come after you, blank person, whoever you are, and destroy you because you ruined my moment. This was about me and Owen, blah, 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 blah. It would have to be that if he doesn't win it.
But nothing that they can do would be as satisfying as him winning the Owen and, hugging Owen's widow in Calgary and all that. I mean, I really think it would be super special. And really, I mean, how much more can you do with Jeff Jarrett? I mean, I really feel like this would be sort of his crowning moment. what complicates everything is this stipulation that you get the title shot, and they're not giving the title shot on Wembley Stadium unless they are. Who knows? I mean, is that the crazy thing? Who knows? But really, it's like, you watch that, and I've always said this, like, and I've interviewed I don't know how many hundreds of wrestlers over my career, and Jeff Jarrett's always been one of the most likable. Whatever you think about him, his act, his career, he's just such a genuine guy, and wears his heart on his sleeve. And what a great career this guy has. And what is he? He's got to be like close to 60 now. And out there cutting a promo like that, still looks great and great shit. I mean, like, has
anybody gotten a job more than this guy, Brian? I'd like to cut to you. Like, this guy cannot not get a job at this point.
I interviewed him for actually this podcast when his podcast was launching. Kevin asked me to interview him for that. And yeah, I was trying to run down his accolades, and he was reminding me of things. He's like, "Oh, and I also worked in Japan, and I also did this, and I also worked there." Things that I had forgotten about or didn't even realize. I mean, this guy, he wrestled for the AEW World Tag Team title and the AWA World Tag Team title.
Isn't that crazy?
That's how long he's been around for. I think 1986 is when he started. I think it was 86. And he was
birth year.
I think he was a teenager. So he's not, I mean, I think at this point he might be in his mid 50s.
Yeah.
He started very young. Yeah, it's just an incredible career.
He's not like a hobbled old man.
No. Right? And he is, like you said, he's very likable. I watched the Owen Hart thing. My wife was sitting next to me when it was on, and she had met Jeff at Cauliflower Alley a couple of years ago because he was there when they did the Memphis night and they honored all the Memphis guys. And my wife just goes like, he was a really nice man. He was he's not like the other ones. He was very down to earth and nice and approachable. I was like, yeah, he is.
That's how he keeps getting a job.
Yes. I mean, this guy, didn't he have like a weird Rick Rude situation where he was like in WWE and then he was in AEW, like on their TV at the same time or something? Because you remember when he was, or maybe I'm thinking of it's the Ric Flair's last match thing, because he,
oh, right.
For people, I mean, for like 12 minutes, he was the vice president of live events in WWE. People forget this. Like about 4 years ago or so, or 3 years ago. And he was wrestling in SummerSlam or refereeing the Usos match, right? Or something like that. Mm-hmm. The same weekend that he was wrestling Ric Flair in a tag team match on Flair's last match show. You know what I mean? Like, who does that? Who else is doing stuff like that?
Yeah. I really think he's aged well, not just physically, but in his career, because I don't know that we would have been talking about Jeff Jarrett like this even 10 years ago. But now you've got like that perspective of history and like, damn, what a career, and that he's still going. So, again, I'd love to see them pivot and just go ahead and do it. Then say that he doesn't want the title shot and I don't know, or defend the title shot against somebody else. I think there's a way of doing it all. I don't, maybe they painted themselves in a corner, but I think with some creativity, they could paint themselves out of it and give fans like a really cool moment.
They're bookers.
Yeah, absolutely. That's it. What else? Why don't we turn to unless there's anything else, Reg, generally speaking, how are you thinking about AEW? I mean, like, one thing I'm really interested in about Forbidden Door is the crowd. They just released some numbers about Double or Nothing, and the attendance was way down from past years. They've always done pretty well in New York. Brian, you were there for Nassau Coliseum in December, and the place was packed, legit packed. I don't know what UBS Arena is going to look like on Sunday night. Again, I think it's going to be kind of like, a state of AEW. It's going to be somewhat revealing about where they are, how they could draw in New York, the biggest market, with a pay-per-view, not necessarily a super marquee pay-per-view, but I think a marquee main event. So yeah, what do you think about how they're doing business-wise? Every time this conversation comes up, I am in a weird place because I'm completely satisfied. Like, they are booking specifically for Righteous Reg. Like, what happens on TV, like, happens for me. So when they're like,
oh, AEW needs to. I'm like, they don't need to change anything. I don't know what you guys are talking about. That episode that happened last week, that was the lowest. That episode was awesome. So it's like, I don't know where to. They're like, what should they do? I'm like, they're doing great to me. I don't know. And like Brian, I think brought up the best point. When AEW started, WWE was in a downturn, and WWE fans are the most loyal wrestling fans they are. When WWE's hot, only WWE exists. So this tribalist thing keeps happening because WWE fans, and for a good reason, we've been conditioned. We just watched the death of WCW. We've been conditioned to say there's only one place. Everybody else that exists against us, they don't exist. It's only WWE. And so I understand. And like now that those fans are satisfied, they're not gonna come back to AEW. Like if you're gonna get new AEW fans, old WWE or current WWE fans aren't the way to go because they're already satisfied and they don't like the product that you guys put on. They like a specific style of wrestling, and AEW isn't it. So I think that in order to grow, they're going to have to look into other places, into other kind of casual wrestling fans. If getting the WWE universe over here for ratings is your idea, you got to figure something else out. But like I said, I'm satisfied, so I don't really know where to go from there.
I think you're absolutely right, and it's an interesting thing. Like, you know, being the alternative only works when the thing you're an alternative to is bad, right? I mean, when WWE is putting on a good show, what's the alternative of good, right? You know, so I don't even know if that it is that AEW's changed that much from where it was a few years ago, and people were more positive about it. It's just that. Yeah, WWE's better now, and they've always super served a certain niche of fans. It kind of reminds me like when I first watched Ring of Honor, and I remember going to my first Ring of Honor show in 2006, and it was kind of a similar place where WCW had been now shut down for a number of years. TNA was a thing, but it wasn't like that hot, and it had been so long since like there was a real viable alternative, something that looked different. And then I went to see the first Ring of Honor show where, you know, frankly, it's all work rate, you know, it's just work rate. And it blew my mind. And it was like, wow, this is so great because it was so different than what I was watching. That same formula, you know, years later just didn't work. It was like, you know, you captured the audience that you were going to capture with that style, and a fan like you, Reg, that wants that, you got them right, and you're making them very happy. But how do you grow from there? You know, that's it. And on one hand, and I think this might kind of like sort of dovetail into the conversation I want to have about who killed WCW. It's like the temptation can be like, well, WWE's doing something that's really working well. Let's just do what WWE's doing because that's what fans want to see. But then you lose what makes you, right? I mean,
then you're going to lose me because I don't want to see that. I want to see AEW.
If John Cena showed up on AEW tomorrow, like, yeah, maybe the ratings go up, but then it doesn't feel like it wouldn't be AEW anymore. So I get it. You know, why don't we just jump into Who Killed WCW? Because I just watched the last. Did you guys watch all the episodes or any of the episodes?
I did. I watched all 4 of them.
I haven't seen the last one yet. I didn't get to the last one yet, but I know how it ends.
You know,
spoiler.
Because of that, I didn't think like you know, there'd be much revealing, but actually the last one is it's maybe the best one because it really digs into kind of like the corporate issues at play that brought.
Did they talk about?
Maybe were more significant than anything. Yeah, they talked about Jamie Kellner.
Jamie Kellner, okay, yeah,
and who just died a couple days ago, and somebody's on the show saying "F you, Jamie Kellner."
Yeah.
Oh my God,
Simon Dallas Page.
Oh my God! You would think they would have cut that out. No, was there an acknowledgement that he died? Did they add anything?
You know what? Mine cut off before the credits ran. So
yeah, I didn't see anything about them acknowledging his death. So
yeah, I posted something. I posted something where I was just like, "Wow, this is really, you know, bizarre, ironic, or whatever." Like, as this show is airing, Who Killed WCW? Jamie Kellner, who probably did kill WCW, has died, and people were like, how could you be celebrating his death just because of? I'm like, I'm not. I'm just saying it's weird that this happened at this time. It's kind of weird. I'm not saying he deserved it. Like,
He was
where do
very
you
much
get that from?
positioned as a villain
Right.
and I don't know what if
And
any.
it's not just in wrestling circles because he was a big media guy. I know, Reg, you're the media man, but he was a guy that was known for, he would come in and he would kill stuff that wasn't performing, but it was stuff that was really beloved by people. Like he did the same thing. I mean, one thing he did, which a lot of people are sore about too, of my generation or younger, is Kids WB. He killed that.
I hate this guy.
So this guy,
I didn't know that.
He pulled the plug on Kids WB. So I mean, like, there are guys that come in to these. Like, I remember when I worked at WWE, I won't mention the guy's name, but there's a guy who came in. They brought him in to help when they were launching 24/7, and he was the guy. He was the guy in cable who did things like, adding commercials to AMC or like moving, Cartoon Network away from classic cartoons. And he was all proud of it because it made the companies more money, which is the thing that Jamie Kellner was there to do too. And in my head, as a fan of those things, I'm thinking like, you son of, you know what I mean? So that's where the conflict comes from. But the guy was doing his job, it was not performing. So
It was so interesting. And the last episode is really cool because they dig into a lot of this issue. Also, just as an aside, one of the cool things about that episode was that apparently there was somebody who worked for WCW at the time who was filming his own kind of documentary about the last Nitro. And so there's all this like never before seen footage of WCW wrestlers, personnel in Panama City that day, kind of like taking it all in. And there's a scene where it was really cool where like Dustin, I think the cameraman asked Dustin Rhodes what's going on. He doesn't know. And Charles Robinson's like, oh, I got the format right here, pulls it out of his pocket, and they're looking at it. And you see, Vince McMahon promo, and Dustin Rhodes is like, this is crazy. So there was some really cool stuff that way. But
what's the who was the president of the WWF? What was the guy's name?
Snyder, who they interviewed. So yeah, they had some people who were really intimately involved in that decision making, and it's super fascinating because so much of as we just did, so much of discussion of like what happened to WCW, what killed WCW, deals in like booking and wrestlers and who's on top, and was there too much NWO, and was David Arquette winning the world title such a bad thing. At the end of the day, it's a bunch of guys in a corporate boardroom that are like, wrestling, nah.
Yeah, seriously,
right.
yeah,
right. That's it, and that killed WCW. Now, granted, there was more to it than that, but it's funny. It's like because you live through it, and as it's going on in real time, you have thoughts about it, but having this perspective of history. So I think this kind of comes at the right time. And watching back on it, it's like I do think like my feelings about the whole thing have really evolved over the years, and there is there's a lot to digest, but in short, I think like here's some of my takeaways. Vince Russo didn't kill WCW, but I do think he took it to a point that it was hard to bring it back from. And I don't even necessarily mean that it was so bad, and it was bad. But what one of my takeaways about this is the importance of branding, right? What Vince Russo did, and it's kind of what we were just talking about at AEW, is that he made it look unrecognizable.
Right.
I mean, you think about what that Vince Russo WCW, and remember, people forget this because Vince Russo has been so demonized, sometimes rightfully, over the years. Russo was supposed to be the savior. I mean, he came over and people were thrilled about Vince Russo taking over WCW because it got so bad. And a lot of the things that he did were what fans had been calling for, right? Oh, these old guys at the top, we need to elevate young talent. So he was doing all of that, and he did turn the whole place upside down. But the end result looked like nothing like WCW. It was unrecognizable from the WCW, which that we knew, which for better or for worse was sort of synonymous with Eric Bischoff's fingerprints, right? I mean, like good, bad, or indifferent, the WCW that found success was Hulk Hogan at the top, Macho Man, Goldberg, Sting, Ric Flair, Nitro Girls dancing, you know, that logo, that look, all that stuff. I mean, when you think peak Nitro, you've got a picture in your head, and that's Eric Bischoff's vision of WCW. And Bischoff did take it into the dirt. I mean, by '99, WCW was really, really, really bad. I mean, and maybe worse even than the Russo era WCW, but it still was WCW, right? And I don't think that, looking back, it was like irretrievable. I mean, I think they, even that low, they could have pulled the nose up. And because we've seen bad wrestling and bad wrestling promotions, whether it's TNA or even WWE in recent years, bad booking can be corrected. But when the reaction was get rid of Bischoff and turn the whole place upside down and make it look completely different, that's where I think there was no coming back. So there's a lot of people thinking that like Bischoff got off easy in Who Killed WCW. Clearly, he worked with them, so you know, maybe there was some spin. And
it was kind of a Bischoff redemption story, a little bit.
Yeah, and maybe not like full accountability for a lot of the mistakes that he made. But I do think that Eric Bischoff's WCW was salvageable, and Vince Russo's maybe wasn't. And that's how you can say it was worse, because I think one of the things that we forget, and sorry for rambling, was that there was a lot of good in Vince Russo's WCW in terms of like work rate. I mean, I don't know that Booker T would have ever been a main event star were it not for Vince Russo. So it's easy to dump on him. But there was some good that Russo brought in. My other take on this is, you know, another documentary or a pair of documentaries that I think like really tell the story about where the culture was at the time. And this has nothing to do with wrestling. But there's two documentaries that came out around the same time about Woodstock 99. You guys remember Woodstock 99? And, you know, it tells you where culture was. And it was Howard Stern, Jerry Springer, Girls Gone Wild. It was just like kind of toxic, gross, masculine, you know, and that was Vince Russo's vision, and that was his WCW. And to some extent, that was the Attitude Era, but I think it was tempered with some of the kind of the wrestling background of Vince McMahon and Pat Patterson, some of the other people who were there. Without those guys there, it was just full on Vince Russo, you know, every vice that he had, and it came through. And you watch that, his era of WCW, and, you know, some of the matches might have been really good, you know, going back to the work rate thing, but the whole mood of it was just kind of gross. You know, it was just, and it's very late 90s Limp Bizkit, you know, you know, Woodstock 99-ish. And I don't know. There's my thoughts. What did you think? What's kind of your takeaway after seeing at least the first few episodes, Brian?
Well, one thing that I thought they did well, the Bischoff, you mentioned Bischoff, and I thought the main reason that he came out looking really good, to his credit, is that he's very circumspect about this stuff. He sits there and he goes, yeah, I messed up. This is what I did wrong. I shouldn't have done this.
On certain things. I think he does it carefully.
Okay. But he owns certain things, and he makes valid points. Whereas, and then you superimpose him with the other people on there who seem to have learned nothing. Like Kevin Nash sitting there going like, well, my check cleared, so who cares? I don't know. It seemed great to me. Or then Goldberg acting like he was actually beating people in real matches. I don't know where, you know, Bret Hart taking the piss out of everything. God bless him, sitting there going, these were a bunch of morons. But Bischoff comes out looking good because he seems to own certain things. Now, what I thought they did really well was demonstrating that from the word go, there were people in the Turner organization, which later became Time Warner and all that, who did not want WCW to succeed. And people that were following the business back then, they knew that. And, you know, it was one of these things from the very beginning, people going in the company like, why is Ted Turner doing this? Why? He's like such a weird goober Southern wrestling mark. Like, why? He's a multi-billionaire, whatever he is. Why is he doing this? Like, that was the question even then. And so it makes sense later on what happened, because now you've got Turner out of the picture. He's been put to pasture. You've got all the corporate mergers going on. The company's exposed. They don't have the protector anymore. So those like vultures circling can get their way. But on top of that, it still wouldn't have happened if they didn't leave an opening, I think. So like, yeah, no, it's not because of booking that WCW died, but would they have done it if they were still the number one company in the business? Maybe yes. Maybe they still would have said, you know what, we still don't want it on here because we can't get good sponsors. No one's going to advertise. Car companies are not going to advertise on this show, that kind of thing. There was some truth to that. But I think it would have been a harder case to make if the booking was really strong to pull the plug on that show, or if the ratings were really good to pull the plug. Like I think they, the Russo stuff, the 99 into 2000 stuff, that set the table to where it became hard to defend in a boardroom. If somebody wanted to be the voice of dissent, it was hard to defend. So, that was like they gave the assist and the corporate guys were the ones that, pulled the plug for sure. So, I mean, I thought they told the story well. Like, you're always going to get people. I guess I'm one of these I'm just happy to be here people, because I look at these documentaries and I go like, who would have ever thought that these subjects would be treated so seriously, to get these documentaries talking about it, and not even produced by a wrestling company, like independently, people in the media going, yeah, we're going to do like this multi-part documentary on why WCW failed. Like, I just think that's an amazing thing to see. And I thought they did a fairly decent job of telling that story.
Yeah, I mean, in the whole AOL Time Warner merger and how significant that was in the media landscape, what became of WCW at the time was probably like an afterthought, right? In all these meetings, it was just this thing that came up on the ledger, and like, let's get rid of it. But 20-something years later, it's the part that is still discussed. And the other thing you mentioned that I think is so relevant, and I remember, at the time, Vince McMahon would always, when he talked about competition, he always wanted to frame his competition as Ted Turner. He wanted to be seen as in the same league, not as a promoter like Bischoff or anybody else, but as like this billionaire media conglomerate, a guy. And at the time, I think fans thought like Ted Turner really has got nothing to do with it. And day to day he wasn't. But what is so clear was that Ted Turner was keeping that place afloat because he just liked wrestling. And the moment that he was out of power, that merger, it was over, because they didn't have that advocate at the top who, because like you touched on, I think, the booking as bad as it got and ratings as low as it got, as long as Turner was there, I think, like he did with Bischoff in launching Nitro, I think would have when it got that bad, maybe what eventually would have happened was it ended up on Ted Turner's desk with another meeting with Ted Turner. How do we fix this? And throwing money and resources at it. But without him at the helm, it was just pull the plug.
In the fourth episode, they kind of got into this conspiracy about the sale, and like,
I don't know how much I bought that.
Yeah, stuff. I was like, I didn't really get why they tried to hammer home the like, WWF, because they got it for so cheap that it was some conspiracy. I'm like, what? But that doesn't really make sense. When you want to get the most money you can out of this property, and they only got the whole thing was kind of confusing to me at the end.
Because I don't know if they got, like I said, I didn't see that last one. I don't know if they got into this, but I know you said Stu Snyder was in it, and I saw him briefly on at least one of the earlier episodes too. I was there when that whole thing was happening, and Stu Snyder 100% was brought in for that exact purpose by WWE. So like he had been a Turner exec that was mentioned in the show. He had all those contacts and things. He knew people, and they literally brought him in with the premise of, hey, could you do this for us? Like, people over there. Could you make this happen? And he came in. He was the WWF president, I guess a much more effective one than Jack Tunney. He came in there and he did what he promised to do. And then the very telling thing was, not long after that, they let him go. They were like, thank you for doing that. Good job. Okay, you can go work somewhere else now. Like they just wanted him there for that. and then he was gone, and I forget who came in after him, but this is way before Nick Khan. But I mean,
in the show, he acts like, "Oh no,
No.
I was just like I was just checking,
No.
making some inquiries, and that's
No.
what happened." No, he brought in exactly to do that job. That's so funny.
That was, I mean, look, I don't, that was the understanding when I was there. Like, that's why we're bringing him here, is to do this. So
the other thing that's a little bit, kind of heartbreaking was watching the Bischoff Fusion deal fall apart, because, if it went forward, I do think that there was hope of pulling the nose up. I mean, I think Bischoff, he talked about the plan of essentially sort of scaling down. They're going to be taping every week at the Hard Rock Cafe in some new venue that they built, like on a roof of a hotel or something. Not that different than sort of the model that TNA and even NXT does now. We're going to do it here every a week. We're going to have like our fans. We're going to keep costs low. And I think the idea was we're going to rebuild and we're going to become relevant again. And I'm really curious of what that could have looked like, and they had, audio from the original investors saying that the goal isn't just to survive, it's to get back on top to beat WWE. I mean, would they have known how to do that? I don't know, but it was close to $70 million, that deal. This was a big deal, and it fell apart in kind of the 11th hour, and they ended up selling the thing for like $4 million, which is just crazy. I mean, that's like maybe Goldberg's contract,
It was very close to happening, the Bischoff thing. Somebody pointed out, I can't remember where I saw this too, or like in the WCW magazine or somewhere towards the very end, there was actually an ad for it. Like an actual ad for Bischoff's new WCW. Like, they actually were running ads talking about what it was going to be like and when their first event was going to be. I mean, like, that's how close it was to actually happening. There were materials made up. That it was really going to happen.
The other takeaway was about how doomed and I know you were there for this too, that the WWE relaunch of WCW was, and there was all these high hopes, but when you really see what it is that they got, I don't know that it ever was going to work. I mean, like when you think about what WCW was at its peak, it was Goldberg, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, Hulk Hogan, Ric Flair, Randy Savage, Sting. None of those guys came over. Lex Luger, none of those guys came over. I mean, they got, Gregory Helms,
Kidman,
and right, Shindrak and O'Hare. Yeah, the Giants.
These were all good. These were good workers, but they weren't synonymous with WCW. And another thing, again, that I thought of watching it was the importance of branding. I don't know whose idea it was to ever depart from that original WCW logo. It's a little thing, right? But what do people call it? The exploding vagina.
I was gonna say a squashed bug, Al. Come on.
But again, and to me, that's synonymous with bad WCW, right?
Totally.
I mean, that like you see that and you're like, ugh, that's just bad memories.
I want to see this.
But beyond that, then WWE like redid their logo to a logo that nobody had ever seen and meant absolutely nothing. I don't know. I mean, I think WWE's first move buying WCW would have been returning to that original logo. I mean, that is what you bought. I mean, that is the value is in that brand. I mean, why would you like reinvent the WCW logo after buying it? A little thing,
well, yeah, and I mean, I remember there was you mean when WWE redesigned the logo?
Yeah,
the red. You
the target. It was intended to look like a target, right?
Right. So, I mean, which meant nothing. It had no value. Yeah,
that was done, and I remember I walked into a boardroom in the creative services department, and they had the walls covered in different logo ideas of what they were going to do. And they went with that one.
Was the logo up there? I mean, was there, if there was any consideration?
There was consideration to keep the old logos. They wanted to blow it all up. Here's the thing. We were even told, and once you notice this, you could never unnotice it. Once WWE took over and bought it, it was only ever referred to by the letters and never the full name ever again.
because you wouldn't
They
say
never said World Championship
Ah.
Wrestling ever, not one time ever, even to this day. It's always just WCW. And we were told unofficially, I guess, that the reason for that was that Vince was still sore over the whole 80s thing on TBS because the show was World Championship Wrestling. The show that he bought on the Turner Network that he bought from, it used to be the old Georgia show, was called World Championship Wrestling. He bought that show and that time slot. And when the WWF was on TBS for like a year, it was called World Championship Wrestling. And that show was a total flop. And then he had to sell it to Crockett. And then that store sort of started the process to the Crockett company, like morphing into World Championship Wrestling. So there was still this vendetta of, I'm going to bury that name. I don't want to see that name World Championship Wrestling ever again. We're just going to call it WCW. And those are the stupid things. When you saw that happening in real time, you start to go, oh, this is never going to work.
Right.
Because they can't acknowledge it. They're still acting like it's the competition. So there was a lot of that. But the thing that never gets talked about now with the revisionist history, and I even saw this again because I just recently saw, I had never seen it, the Booker T biography on A&E that they did, which was very good, but they kept making this false statement of, they made you think that the plan all along was to do the WCW invasion. It was not. They wanted to, maybe eventually, they wanted to run it separately as its own brand. It was going to have its own show on its own channel. They were even going to try to keep it on TBS, which is so stupid because they just got canceled. They wanted to really have it as a separate brand. And that's also why they were so keen on reinventing it and coming up with new logos and things. They were really trying to launch it as its own show, like a separate wrestling company. They wanted to make it seem like, and they gave up after about like a week. They were just like, screw it. We don't have all the big stars we need. The fans are rejecting it. Of course they are. You taught them to hate WCW for years and years. You hate WCW.
Exactly.
So of course it's not going to work. Like,
and then you gave up Buff Bagwell, dude. What are you thinking? Come on.
Right. Buff Bagwell was the sacrificial lamb. I'm not saying that match was Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat, but that was not the bad match everybody makes out.
No, totally not. Not at all.
He was the sacrificial lamb. And the other thing was when they, they're shopping this around and they can't get anybody to buy. Shocker. So they go to TBS and TBS is like, we don't want wrestling. We just got rid of wrestling. They go to, were they on TNN at that time or was it still USA? I don't remember. But whatever network they were on for Raw, they went to them and said, hey, do you want Nitro? They were like, hell no. You guys just killed Nitro. Like that show was the competition. We're not. So they created this scenario where they had killed the brand so thoroughly that they couldn't do anything.
And they told everyone that they know that it sucked too. It's like, hey, do you want this thing that we told you sucked?
Right. And the fans had the same response. Like, now you want us to be rooting for WCW? Because if you remember, that's sort of like what the thinking was. They almost wanted WCW to be the babyface company and WWF was going to be the heel company.
Right.
And the fans totally rejected that idea. It was doomed to fail from the very beginning.
I'm thinking of all of them sitting at WrestleMania 17 and that little with Shane up there, and it wasn't any of the top guys. And it's like, that's who it's going to be for WCW. And from then it felt weird.
Right. They had when it first happened, they had a training camp essentially where they didn't have the performance center yet. So there was a building in Stamford, which we called Tracks. It was like partly a photo studio.
Tough Enough.
Yeah, they had the rings in there. They brought all the WCW guys, all quote unquote, to Tracks. And I remember that was the day. If you ever heard about, there was like this real infamous incident between Hurricane Helms and Bagwell, where they got into this brutal fight. Like they were throwing frozen bottles of water at each other. That's not fun to get hit with. So they sent us down there. They were like, "Hey, the WCW guys are here. Can you go down there and interview them? Like grab them when they're in, you can get all these things from them. They're all here in Stamford." And they sent us there. And no offense, like I walked in and I was like, where is everybody? Like, okay, we got Mike. I hate naming people because it's so, but you know what I mean? Yeah. It's like, okay, Mike Awesome's here. Mark Jindrak is here. Stacy Keebler's over there. And I'm thinking what you guys would have been thinking. Where's Sting? Where's Lex Luger? Where's Diamond Dallas Page? Where's Goldberg? Where's the NWO?
Yeah.
And you just saw like, okay, this is what it's going to be. I guess it's just like the mid-carders and like the mid-carders, like with a capital M, like not
and these
even
guys
the
hadn't
upper
even been
mid-card.
established yet. Like you know what I mean? They were trying to build these names and brands on their programs that people weren't watching.
That's when you knew, like, you're thinking they're going to try to sell fans on the idea of this fantasy thing of WWF versus WCW. And it's going to be disappointing because it's one thing to want to build up these guys and make stars out of them, right? Great. But that's not what people are thinking of when they're thinking of this clash of the Titans. They're thinking of top guys versus top guys. And you're setting them up for that, and then you're going to let them down. And so you just knew it was like a slow motion train wreck is really what it was.
Yeah. You mentioned Booker T, and I think he's one of the guys who comes off really well because remember, everybody was offered a deal, but it was pennies on the dollar. And I guess understandably, a lot of these guys are like, well, I'm not going to go work however many nights a week, take out this crazy schedule and make less money. And I guess when you are, the Hulk Hogan or something, it makes sense. But Booker realized that, it's now or never. And he was still a young guy there in his 30s. And smartest thing he ever did. I mean, they brought him in working with Steve Austin, and I'm sure he ended up making much more money. It's still getting a paycheck from WWE, where a lot of these guys, I think, would have been, well served to take that cut, come in, remain relevant, and in the long run have made a lot more money than the little bit of money that they made, sitting out that contract.
But I think part of that with Booker T was it wasn't just a coincidence. I really think that they had big plans for him. So, for example, on the last Nitro is when he won the title.
Right.
Now, that was not, as far as I know, that was like a Vince call because he was running that show. I mean, WWF was running that last Nitro. That was booked by them. And they made the decision, we're putting the world title on you on the last Nitro. So you had to imagine they were already thinking about what they're going to be doing. Right. They're going to bring him in to WWF as the WCW world champion, which is exactly what they did. So like they had a plan for him. They knew they wanted to do something special. And yeah, that's probably because he was the guy that was going to play ball. And they knew he was the biggest star that they were going to have right away immediately. And they ran with that. But that was, they had plans for him.
Yeah. But I think it's fascinating. I mean, one of the things that the last episode ends with them going around to pretty much everybody that's interviewed in the documentary and asking them the question, who killed WCW? And you get various answers. And it's some really interesting insights. I mean, the one that really stuck with me, I think, might have been from Stu Snyder. And I think this is very true. And it's something that comes up now with the discussion with AEW, was the difference of WWF having that one person that everybody knew was the boss, that everybody was accountable to, buck stopped with him, what he said goes, versus from WCW, where they never really had that. And the closest they had to that was when Bischoff was really running things, but Bischoff's style of management, and it's why WCW had success for those years, was deferring to the stars, right? So Bischoff was, the top guy there, but his number one priority was do what Hulk Hogan wants, do what Kevin Nash wants, like defer to those guys. And it worked for a while until it didn't, and it's all to say, I don't know. Well, here's a question to you guys. Let's say the Fusion deal does go through and they stay on TBS and TNT. They keep those 2 hours Monday night and Thursday night. What happens? I mean, is there a world where WCW is still around today?
I don't know, because I feel like Bischoff is going to trot out Hogan like immediately, and that's like not the vibe that they wanted to. You know what I mean? Like Bischoff like still had a vision. I think like he was going to make the deal and like try to rehash what got him to the dance, and I feel like Hogan would have been the first thing. So I don't know. Like earlier when he talked about Vince Russo, like he had the right idea with wanting to push the young guys. He just didn't like wrestling at all. So he had so much fluff in there. I think that Bischoff would have just been stuck in the past, and I don't know if he would have made it work.
I think there wouldn't have been a TNA wrestling. I think
that's true.
I think basically all the energy that went into that would have gone into Bischoff's thing. I think Jarrett might have wound up getting hooked up into that. I think all those people those cast-offs that went to TNA, like the Hogans and the Nashes and all that kind of stuff, I think that would have been Bischoff's company. It might have still been around, but I think it would have maybe had the TNA trajectory is kind of like what I'm thinking.
ECW had just died too, so we could probably factor in a lot of those guys would have probably came over to WCW over WWF, I think.
Yeah. But I do think that the part that is insurmountable, and maybe it's why everything goes the same way, is the AOL Time Warner merger and Ted Turner being out, because wrestling is cyclical. It wouldn't even have taken ratings being in the basement. I think once they were, even if they were less than super stellar with Monday Nitro at their peak, they would have been looking for a way to get wrestling off of
right. Because the reality of wrestling programming is that even when it's doing well, I think this is maybe not as much of a problem as it used to be. You can't get the same amount of ad revenue as you can for other programming. Like, one of the reasons, we all remember this, back in the day, you'd sit there and go, wait, they're preempting Raw next week for a dog show? Or and this is another crazy thing, they preempt it for US Open, which you could kind of say, okay, it's the US Open, but when Raw was really hot, they were doing better ratings than the US Open was doing on USA. And so common sense would be like, well, maybe they won't do it anymore. But they kept doing it anyway, because even with lower ratings, the US Open gets better ads, a better ad revenue. The Westminster Dog Show, believe it or not, was getting better ad revenue than WWF. So that's the thing that's so frustrating, because we saw it even in magazines too. It didn't matter like how many issues we were selling, the magazines on fire, whatever, the alcohol companies, car companies, the big premium, they don't want to touch us. So that was what frustrated people on the executive side. They were like, well, you know what, we didn't even care about the ratings. Like, this is a black eye to have on our organization. We don't want to have wrestling period on our channels. That's impossible to fight unless you have somebody at the very, very top like Ted Turner saying, no, this is my pet project and it's staying here.
Even today, I mean, WWE is not getting the Cokes, and the Pepsis, and the Budweisers of the world. That's just the reality. I don't know if that ever.
Why do you think Snickers presents every single pay-per-view in history? Right? Do you think that that's their goal? Like, yes, Snickers,
or like they do like Twisted Tea now. It's like they get Skittles, like the most off the wall brands. Yeah. Right. Wrestling still looked at like that, which is really funny. Like, it's still carny. It's still down home in the basement type shit.
I think it's gotten better, but than it used to be. But yeah, it's still behind other things, certainly, for sure.
I think it's a good segue to the last thing I want to talk about. I know we're running low on time here, so we won't touch on everything WWE, but I do think it's worth talking about the Wyatt Six and that kind of whole presentation. For one thing, WWE is like, I mean, it is clearly not Vince McMahon's WWE just because of the blood. I mean, I haven't seen this WWE. And that visual, when the Wyatt Six first debuted, is as graphic as anything that they've done in a long time. They weren't just beat up. It looked like, was it Chad Gable got his head, his brains blown out? I mean, there was a spatter behind. I don't know if it was him or somebody else, but somebody looked like they were shot in the head. And
there was like a tech guy in Gorilla that basically looked like they'd blown his brains out. It was great.
A lot, and then also we saw it with the Drew Punk angle. A couple of days later. But on the Wyatt Six thing, I've got a lot of mixed feelings about it. Not to speak ill of the dead, but I wasn't the biggest fan of Bray Wyatt's act, especially what it evolved to when it got so kind of not just cartoonish, but it was just some of it was really kind of unpleasant to watch, especially like the Fiend stuff. So seeing that brought back, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, and it hasn't fully played out. So we will see. I got to say,
Reg is not going to give them the benefit of the
doubt. No way.
The Bo Dallas interview we saw on Raw, I thought was really well done. If from a production standpoint, and again, I'm not a huge fan of all that, but I thought he did a fine job. I thought for what they were going for, they did a good job, and I've seen a lot of good reviews on it. I don't know how I feel about this whole thing. And obviously, like the part of it that makes it even more uneasy is that the guy isn't here anymore. I mean, they're basically carrying on with the gimmick from a guy who's not here. And I don't know if it makes it better or worse that it's his brother who's sort of, bringing it back and rehashing his brother's act. It's all a kind of all a little bit sort of weird and icky. But I want to give them the benefit of the doubt. Reg, what do you think of what we've seen out of the White Six so far?
I kind of have the same feelings how you feel on the Bray Wyatt stuff. I've been in trouble online for talking about Bray Wyatt, and I would never disrespect the dead. But it's been 2 weeks, you guys, and they haven't they've been in the ring, but no matches. Like, what's this leading to? They're going to continue to. That's what I always had the issue with Bray Wyatt is like they're going to continue to tell these stories, do the spooky stuff, and then what?
You got to
get wrestle. The bell's going to ring, and then you got to watch that, and it's not going to add up to the lore and all the stuff that you're giving up.
Right, and that's the thing is that the people that they and I understand from like a personality standpoint why they chose these people. There is all of them have a kind of a vibe, the spooky vibe. That works in that act. But the reality is that all of those people have always had a hard time connecting with fans. They're right. Not the most dynamic performers. When you talk about Dexter Lumis and Nikki Cross and Eric Rowan, I mean, these people were not the most dynamic personalities. And those masks come off and the ring entrance is over. And right, they got to work a match. And I don't know how exciting that's going to be. And that goes for Bo Dallas too. I mean, unless it is the guys really like changed the presentation and his ring, and he was a fine worker, but I mean, Bo Dallas was never setting the world on fire with his act. So this was always the issue with Bray Wyatt. It was so much sizzle, right? Mm-hmm. And then, the bell would ring and it was a Bray Wyatt match,
It's the new Retribution.
Yes. Oh my God, I haven't heard of that in so long.
and there were good people that got pulled into that. I love Dijak. I don't understand why that guy isn't like one of the top guys in WWE right now.
It feels like that's a guy that they would really like. He's huge. He moves well. It doesn't make sense.
One of the best matches I saw WrestleMania weekend was that three-way at NXT Stand and Deliver. Mm-hmm. That he was involved in.
I saw him in Northeast Wrestling. Okay, before he got called up to NXT, he had a match against Cody when Cody was doing his whole indie tour thing, and it tore the house down. They were incredible, and against the guy who's like now the top guy in the business. And he was that good. But I remember at the time, Mercedes Martinez basically saying like, yeah, take me out of this. Like that rarely happens in wrestling. Most people are like, God, I'm happy to, they're doing this with me. It tells you a lot. But, to keep it on the Wyatt thing, I'm with you, Al, and I'm definitely with you, Reg, where, you're not even trying to be nice about it. Good for you. But the thing about it is, yeah, you feel bad because, there's a real person who died and everything, and they're trying to continue his legacy. But it feels to me, even at its best, like it's just morbid. Like even that interview with I don't know what they're going to call him, Bo Dallas or whatever, Taylor Rotunda was just uncomfortable.
I felt uneasy
because it's too real. It's like, people always used to talk about the thing about how in World Class they would use the death of the Von Erichs to build storylines and angles, and how that was really uncomfortable and morbid, the whole David Von Erich thing. This is a little bit better than that to me, because I feel like he's totally on board with this. Like he absolutely wants to do this. I don't think he's being exploited or pushed. If anything, I think he's probably been the one pushing for it. Totally. But it still is hard for me to watch, turning it into a storyline. And I know there's a lot of people that see it as a great tribute to do it in that way, but where like his whole death is a part of the storyline and everything. Like even what I'm saying is, even at its best, I have trouble digesting that. And I also think, this is one of the, it's all that very high concept Bray Wyatt stuff where you look at it and go like, what is going to actually happen when the bell rings. You know, they're going to have to sell. So there's going to have to be faces behind this. There's going to have to be, and I mean like physical faces, you know,
Right.
There's going to have to be, the rubber has to hit the road at some point. What's that going to look like? And the part of me that goes, all right, I'm going to give this a chance. I feel like that part went away the last time they did this.
Exactly.
When he was still around. And it was a great moment. And then again, it was like, okay, basically what happened because of this is LA Knight became a star because people looked at the situation and they were like, I like this guy. Like, I like the guy that's making fun of all this and pointing out how ridiculous it is. That's how LA Knight became a star, was basically out of that. So, I mean, you know, I don't know. People, it makes you feel old and out of touch. I know, Al, we talk about this sometimes when you watch something like that segment and you're sitting there going like, okay. And then you go on Twitter and everybody's like, I was crying. Oh, what a moment. And, you know, it's like,
I felt like that.
They're looking at it like it's, you know, the Giants winning the pennant and all that kind of stuff. And you're going like, am I really like, you think of the Principal Skinner meme from The Simpsons, right? Where he's like, it is the children who are wrong. You start to question everything. But yeah, I even said something like, this is the kind of thing that once upon a time, we used to call it wrestle crap, kids.
Yeah, seriously. When they got to that line of in the promo where Bo's talking to whoever, Uncle Howdy, and he's like, well, how do you feel about your brother dying? That's when it's like the reality meeting wrestling is like, it might be a little too much for me. Like, we're talking about a real person that died and we're kind of having it into a story. It's like, I don't know. That's where the lines get kind of blurry for me.
And I mean, I understand some of what people say because I give them credit from a certain point of view, because it's like, it's interesting in a way that it's almost like the storyline is continuing, because you had Bray Wyatt, who was like the adversary of Uncle Howdy, or trying to understand what Uncle Howdy wanted. And now it almost seems like his death is like a part of this whole story in a weird way. So, I mean, I guess like the writer side of me is going like, wow, there's something kind of impressive about how they did that. But then the human being side is like, no, that's really weird and gross. I can't justify that. But, you know, they did this thing, like you said, where everybody's dead in the back. I had to sit there with my son, and I don't want to be the guy who's like, think of the children. But I'm sitting there with my son going like, it's the first time I ever said to him, he's 7 years old, I ever had to be like, this is pretend. I never do that with him. I'm always like trying to like sell it to him, you know, like, oh my God. He was like, Daddy, is that? I'm like, no. This is just, it's just makeup. They're just pretending. It's like a movie. It was pretty harsh for any kind of wrestling, let alone WWE. And then you get Adam Pearce. Look, I like Adam Pearce a lot. Okay. But this is a classic thing WWE does, where he comes on social media and he pretty much is just like, listen, you idiots. Chad Gable is fine. What the hell is wrong with you people? Well, I don't know, Adam. Maybe it's the fact that you showed him with a bloody hole in his head, laying slumped against a wall on TV. Silly us. We thought you were trying to say he was dead. Well, I don't know where we got that idea from. It's that whole thing they do where it's like, oh, you're not that dumb to fall for the thing that we wanted you to fall for, right?
You know this is wrestling, right? And it's like, you don't have to do that to me, Adam Pearce. It's fine.
It's this coy thing that they do. It's like when they make fun of all the bad gimmicks from the past, and you're like, wait a minute, you came up with those things, okay? You wanted us to like those things. So it's like that weird gaslighting that they do that drives me nuts. It's like, you know,
And that's one of the things that I think make it somewhat frustrating, is that WWE has, since Bray Wyatt, kind of moved away from the overtly cartoonish.
Yes.
And this was such a return to this. I mean, you walk backstage and there's like whatever, the dry ice everywhere. There's the fog all around.
It's the kind of thing that if I'm Tony Khan, I'm looking at it going like,
yes,
do more of this.
More spooky.
This was 2019, Vince McMahon, WWE at its worst, you know, swamp matches and and things.
And the
like
fact that they put it on at the end and you're left with that lasting impression is like, oh,
and they've done such a good job lately of hitting that note where there is a reality to WWE with still being really entertaining. I think like the Bloodline stuff is a good example of it. And this was so kind of cartoony. And the kind of the bigger risk of it really on the Wyatt sort of legacy side is that, you know, when Bray Wyatt passed away, it's sort of like all the sins were erased, right? And it was like we looked back on, you saw a documentary, and I think what you're left with is, man, this guy was super creative and, you know, all the good stuff, right? And now they bring this back, and if it flops, and you know, if I was going to put money on it, I don't think this is going on 6 months from now, right? I mean, it doesn't feel like an act that is really sustainable. I think the Retribution is a perfect analogy because and that was gone in a month or something.
Yeah, because that started out as this real like fourth wall breaking thing where they came out and they stopped the whole show. They were destroying the set, and all that kind of thing.
Have a match.
And then they just became jobbers. But it's like one of those things. Even you're watching it happen, and you're going like, "Well, where can this really go? How far can this actually go?" Even the Shield worked really, really well. But even the Shield was like that, where you're like, and I don't mean to lump them in because the Shield really got over and made major stars. But the stars were made when they broke it up, because you can only take that so far. I think they were together for like a year and a half on TV. You can only take it so far where it's like, these guys are taking over the show. They're disrupting everything. Because how far can you really go?
The NWO is right. Yeah. I mean, it's like absolutely right. And the thing is, I don't want to say if and when, because maybe we get put wrong, but if it flops, that's what you're left with in terms of like Bray Wyatt's legacy. You know, not all of it, but I'm saying like it's a stain that doesn't need to be there. Whereas if you just left it alone, I think people will look back on Bray Wyatt as this really kind of influential, creative character, and it's just, you know, it's sort of rebooting it and in a way that doesn't feel super authentic. And I don't know. I just don't know that they needed to do this. I get that like all these people in that act like want an opportunity and feel like they've got something to offer, but the reality is that all those people have some holes in their game. I think it's a diplomatic way of saying it, and I don't know that this act does anything to address that. You know, if anything, I think it highlight. I mean, like have Dexter Lumis go out there and, you know, turn up like that stoic thing that wasn't working, or any of these guys. I don't know. I mean, I don't think it does anybody any favors, potentially. Maybe I'm wrong. You know, hopefully.
We'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, guys. So much going on. We were able to cover all of it, but it's probably a good place to wrap up. As any, Reg, you want to promote anything before we head out of here?
Check out Grapsity every Saturday on the Fightful Network. Also on every Wednesday with Denise on her channel for the AEW Dynamite post show.
Okay, excellent. And Brian, you've got your podcast, you've got a book coming out. What do you want to plug here?
Yeah, I've got the podcast, Shut Up and Wrestle, with Brian R. Solomon. Old school themed show, like we've talked about on here, different guests every week. So what we talk about depends on the guest, you know, that kind of thing. And I recently went out on a limb and had my wife as my guest. People are like, well, I guess you ran out of guests. No, the idea was, what is it like to have to live with someone who watches this crap all the time? And I feel like no one talks about that enough. You know, like, what is it like when someone won't shut up about wrestling? And every time you walk in the room, it's on the TV. So we did that. You know, I like to do outside the box stuff like that. I've also got the Patreon I want to mention too, because I'm trying to get people to take a look at that. I'm doing these watch along audio commentaries of classic wrestling shows, where it's sort of like an old school DVD commentary where you can put it on Peacock or whatever and hit play, and it's me bending your ear about this whole show that you're watching. So it's connected to Shut Up and Wrestle. It's patreon.com/Shut Up and Wrestle. And I've done things like I did the first episode, the first Clash of the Champions with Sting. I did the night at the Garden when Hogan won the title in 1984, like the entire show. I'm going to be doing the first Saturday night's main event, things like that. So it's a project that I recently just started. And again, it's the Shut Up and Wrestle Patreon. So hopefully people will
we should do the big event. There was a conversation we talked about.
Yeah, that would be a good one to do. It's the line, because I'm trying to think of shows to do that are really, really interesting to me, but I don't want to get too obscure and in the weeds, because you want to cast a wide net and get people to come check it out. So I don't want to be like, yeah, I'm doing this Portland wrestling show from 1981. Oh, Ric Flair was there, because you know what I mean? So I'm trying to like keep it. I'll do WWF pay-per-views and things like that. And, you can get away with it because it's just my audio. I'm not incorporating any of their content. It's just my audio. I'm suggesting what you could do with that audio, but it's just my audio.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thanks so much. We will be back soon. Take care, everybody.